is in motion. Mills. Can he run for it? No. In the corner of the end zone. That's a touchdown, Texans. Rookie Brevin Jordan. And what's Davis Mills going to do? He's going to end on the ground on the floor.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight through the Great British Isles. Episode 110 this week. Feels like we've played about 110 games this year. It's the longest season in my memory anyways. The Texans went down 33-13 in a rather predictable loss at home in front of a lot of Seattle fans. And it felt like we were the road team, and it was a bit of a miserable outing again, but we're going to try and make some sense of it once more this week. Only 4 more to go after this, so this is that's the good news. But welcome a returning guest this week, and Mr. Matt Robinson from Battle Red Blog. Matt, how you doing?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me on. Good to talk to you again. Feels like last time we were talking was the off season, or the getting ready for all the optimistic thoughts, and boy, where we've gone from then.
Yeah, well, I suppose, right, it's always in your kind of, it's everybody's nature to want things to be good, and there's so many reasons why it's not, but we'll try and just talk this week and the future, I suppose, but a lot of it's all out of our hands and a lot frustrating, and a lot kind of seems hellishly predictable at times, and that's probably the harshest bit about it, I think, because it felt like a slow-moving train, and it's never really got anywhere so far. But before we talk about the game, Matt, there's what always happens every week pretty much on a Tuesday we record. I think Caserio has some availability, as does Cully, and they tend to make moves on a Wednesday, so we end up talking about it the week later. But last week, Zach Cunningham was released, signed a 4-year $56 million deal last off season, at this similar time to Deshaun as well. What was your reflections just of the release first and foremost, and kind of where it all went wrong, really?
It caught a lot of people off guard. I feel like in the initial aftermath of the news dropping, a lot of people were assuming he was not long for Houston ever since the new regime took in. But for this to come after a benching, which a lot of people pinned to just making sure he doesn't go on injury. And then, sure enough, he ends up hitting the waiver wire. I was actually very surprised that he was claimed, that a team was able to scoop him up without him just hitting unrestricted. And hats off to him. He ended up going where he wanted to go. Seems like the story was he's a bit of a malcontent. So hopefully that clears up the locker room with him gone.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what necessarily damage he did. I suppose Jonathan Grenard's comments were pretty telling. I think he said something had to happen. Cully's comments were telling as well, in the sense that people looking at me cross-eyed, or whatever kind of quote he came out with last week. I was just, like you said, I was surprised Tennessee actually picked up the $10 million injury guarantee he got at that price. So they obviously feel that he's worth it to pick him up via waivers rather than letting him go unclaimed and starting afresh. But it's a shame, because I think he's a player that quite clearly played worse after he got paid. His tape this year was pretty abominable. Last year was terrible, and everybody when people look to tackles and stats and try and fill in the blanks themselves, but it doesn't always tell the true story or the correct picture that what we've all witnessed Zach Cunningham in terms of his ability or lack of ability to play as an inside linebacker in a 4-3. And you thought it would suit him, but being at the will, it didn't suit him. Disciplinary reasons. He reportedly, I've seen a number of people say he was asked to be traded in the off season. He basically asked to quit the team. He wasn't happy, didn't want to be here, so it's right to move on. But I think he's another extension, just like Whitney Merciless's was, just like Tunsil's looking as well at the minute, where you restructured and you've had to take a dead cap hit. And I think the dead cap hit's now up some 40 odd million that we're looking at some point. So it's sizable, and it's mismanagement, I think, from my point of view. If you thought if you thought at any point there was a chance that you might not be here longer term, then you can't restructure people, because then you just end up making it worse for yourself. But in terms of his, obviously he promised a lot and he looked good against Benardrick McKinney. What would you sort of pinpoint kind of where he went wrong, and what's he going to have to do to make a career for himself if he wants to hang around this league?
hopefully in a new environment, he'll be a little bit more motivated. I feel like that was one of the reasons why Grugier Hill sort of passed him by on the depth chart. From what Lovie Smith was saying, he was a good student after class, staying late, working on things. Ultimately, Zach just seems like he was cut from a different era back in like the early 2010s as like the prototypical run and chase linebacker. Uh, I think hopefully in Tennessee they can simplify some of his run fits because that's really where he wasn't able to hold up. There's a lot of hope for him taking over to anchor the middle of the defense with McKinney gone. Clearly wasn't able to hold up to that. There was optimism that he would be resurgent coming back to weak side. That ultimately didn't happen. I think ultimately, if he's able to play his gaps a little bit better, you can see him have a decent turnaround with Tennessee.
Yeah, I think so. It's just another player that from recent drafts now that just the exodus continues and it doesn't kind of seem like it's going to stop at any time soon. And we've obviously got the big elephant in the room, which we'll try and avoid this week because I'm sick of talking about it.
Okay.
We'll see where that goes. But in terms of second half struggles, obviously it was a close game. A couple of field goals in it right till the kind of third quarter, and then Seattle pull away. But since the bye week, Matt, this team have just not been competitive in the second half. And typically teams get stronger after the bye week. You self-scout, you work out your weaknesses, and you devise, nuances to your scheme, break your tendencies to find ways to be more productive. But this team have done the complete opposite of that. So I think, what do you think's behind their struggles? And two, what do you think it says about the coaching staff?
Well, ultimately, those sort of tie in together very nicely. It makes me really question their ability to make adjustments. It makes me question what they're looking at. They have coaches up top in the booth as well as on the sideline. And yet it seems like after our initial few scripted plays go by, it's just everybody's free balling. There was the Tim Kelly comment earlier in the press conference where he pinned offensive struggles on lack of preparation and players being able to adjust to when what they see on the field is different. And I think that's ultimately the biggest thing holding things back.
Yeah, and I think Kelly, was able to look productive with Watson, but he couldn't run the ball last year. This is 2 years, and I don't see a future for him. We'll come on to the remainder of the coaching staff at the minute, and I think the biggest mitigating factor for if you were a play caller for this team, anyone was calling plays with a headset on a Sunday, is talent, right? And I think you've got potentially three guys that I'd maybe keep on that you think definite. I think between Brevin Jordan, who's looking, he's got 3 touchdowns already, which is great because he never played half the season. You got Nico Collins there, who's he's just so close to getting his first touchdown, but he's not got there yet. You've got Titus Howard, who you've invested in. And then beyond that, there's not many bodies on this offensive line or skill positions I think you'd bring back. I think there's a second tier there. The guys of Charlie Heck, who I think just from the broadcast I watched, and I watched half the All-22 before we got in this today, but he looks, he's serviceable as a swing guy. And you've got Davis Mills, who we'll come on to separately, and then you got Brandon Cooks, you got one more year, then you got a voidable year on the back end after another restructure that was done this season. Still kind of getting my head around all those moves that were made, but to sign all these guys that aren't really being very productive for us. But there's a long way, I think, to get this offense personnel-wise and talent-wise in a position where you can expect to be productive. And I think there's obviously the coaching staff aren't doing a good job, but when they've not got a lot of work to work with, you've got to probably cut them some slack, I think.
Slightly so, yeah. I think the biggest thing is in the running game. It's clear Kelly's tried multiple things, and he just can't seem to get that for the life of him. Going back from both this year and the previous year, it's pretty obvious in the evidence. With that being said, there's not a lot of talent to work for. You listed a lot of building blocks on the offense that they have, and the one missing crucial piece in there is going to be the interior. And it honestly seems like a wash that most of these guys will not be returning or have much of a future. And if that were to get fortified, I'd assume we might be able to actually get some movement on the ground game, maybe some support for a young signal caller like Mills, because the weapons are there. Like there's just a revolving door at slot receiver, which just makes you bring up questions about them bringing in so many bodies.
Yeah, I think so. I tweeted a clip earlier where just McRae and Britt, I think, failed to hand off, or McRae and Heck might have been failed to hand off. But I think as well, like, you'll never probably get a good or a true handle on Davis Mills and what he's capable of without a run game and without, continuous pass protection. And look, guys will make plays, guys will beat guys off the edge. There will be breakdowns and protection at times, but it's just simple stuff like they both forget. They both think they're handing him off to the other guy, and he runs through and makes a sack or a TFL. Then it's tough to kind of compute how that can't be ironed out, but we are on our however many iterations of this offensive line. But yeah, I think the three guys in the centre that started this week, I don't think, I struggled to see a role for them coming back beyond being depth pieces, and you've got to hope we bring in guys to compete at those spots. And I think, like, a guy like Justin Britt, I know what he is at this stage of his career. And he's talking about how we're going to go up to Jacksonville and get a result and all this kind of stuff. And you think, well, I'd much rather see Jimmy Morrissey out there because, for a guy who was a 6th round pick, who's got no games under his belt, I don't think it was much worse. So at least there's potential upside there. So I'd much rather see him come back in and play the games. But there tends to be with his coaching staff, like you saw with the Amendola move or whoever that might be, they seem to side with a vet because they're trying to, stop the ship completely imploding. But it's doing that anyway. So you wonder where it goes. But I think the big change for me in the offense was they came out scripted. They ran a lot of screens and actually reasonably well. And when you're running crossers and you're running digs against zone coverage, you're going to make plays. And that's they're well meshed to beat one another. But in the second half, they seem to rush 5-man fronts. And they kind of went to man coverage, and I think it comes back to that talent point again. But when the Seattle made adjustments at halftime and they went man for man, the Texans struggled, and I think that just goes back to talent, but also the coaching staff that it seemed blatantly obvious at the time what was occurring, and the offense stalled. And since the bye week, we've only scored 10 points in the second half, and that all came with Tennessee with multiple turnovers. So I think the coaching staff have really got to have a look at themselves, and you wonder why. And Kelly and Cully this last week said it's not necessarily the adjustments, just the execution of the adjustments. But again, I think those two things go hand in hand, right?
I agree. Ultimately, the execution comes down to the coaching staff, and you can tell who's getting their players ready and who aren't. And I mean, it just feels like a drawn out preseason this year. It just seems like that it's cookie cutter game plans. They're trying to make everything basic, and players are just struggling to follow along. It's mind-numbing to watch, honestly, at a certain point, because it's week after week. You'll see the same things. You'll see a lack of adjustments, and you have to question whether an attempt is even being made sometimes, which is kind of scary to think at a professional level with guys coaching for their jobs.
Yeah, and look, you must mentally get in a hole in a rut when you're losing this many games, right? You're 11 games lost so far. There's probably going to be at least 2 or 3 more in this final 4, but in those final games, we've got a chance to see Davis Mills, and I thought there was some good stuff about his game. I thought he shows a great propensity to be able to throw on the run. Some of his stepping up in the pocket was the best he's probably done to this point. In his limited starts, he showed some and even basic things like throwing screens into the dirt that didn't happen. That was better. So there was a bit of maturation. There was improvement. There's still a lot of stuff you can see happening at the line that he's still a wide-eyed rookie at times. And he misses checks and he misses balances at the line of scrimmage. But what did you make of his performance? And I know a lot of people are throwing a lot of stats out there. But you've got to see beyond that, I think. But what do you think when you watch the actual tape that performance showed and where he is at right now?
Well, yeah, if you look at the stats, he's like the second coming of Mac Jones, it looks like. Yeah. But in terms of what I saw, it was basically he did great at the beginning. He did great at the end during garbage time. And in the middle, you got a hobbled mess. To be fair, though, as critical as I am over like his first start in Carolina, he's come, I don't want to say night and day, but noticeably improved in that regard. But it's pretty obvious in terms of what we have with him. He can operate the offense. He needs a lot of things to go right for him. He can, although I will say the OPI on Brandon Cooks that he had early on, that was a really good demonstration of what he could be in a perfect world. I wish they'd let him throw downfield a lot more. I feel like we could gauge him a little bit better. That seemed to be like what he mainly did in college with like Simi Fogo. And you have that type of body type in Nico Collins, who I desperately want to see get more involved. He's one of the few bright spots that we have on this offense.
Yeah, well, he caught sort of a kind of deep over route in the first drive, I think, to set up the score to Brevin Jordan. He kind of had one in the second half where it was a kind of funny arc. And I think sometimes Mills does have issues thrown to his left hand side because you saw that the ball and kind of Nico kind of almost like was caught out by the trajectory of the throw to the left. And he probably could have had a couple of more catches. He probably could have had an OPI in the end zone. But then it was one of those ones where the team stall out in the red zone. Brandon Cooks get called short of the line. They can't score. They end up kicking 3, and then in the second half it was either a punt or turnover and downs. There was nothing in between, and so it was a performance where I think, as you say, go back to the stats, right? And you've got to peel away the layers slightly because there was 330 yards or so on the board, but 240 of those were before kind of the game was done. So you've the garbage time facet or caveat you've got to account for. And he completed 33 passes. 8 of those were screens as well. So again, it's easy ways to do it, and I'm all for set up and easy plays for him. But I think there just needs to be more of, as you said, to stretch the field and because ultimately you will create more space for the run game if people do have a legitimate concern inside. And I think you got a guy like Chris Conley who's not really featured that much, but he can go a bit. Nico can get it deep as well. So yeah, I think that's one thing. Throwing down the sidelines, there was a couple of clips I put out when we first drafted him, and they were the flashes that you felt, right, okay, I can see what people can see. But there seems to be a hesitancy to do that, whether he's going to get blown up with a hit or what have you. But it feels like they got the game plan more accurate. I think there was a higher volume of passes for him to get these reps he needs. But you just want to see them just let it loose the last couple of games because it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. And I don't, what do you think on that? Just let him run free for the last couple of weeks and see where we end up.
I think Rivers McCallum put out a piece highlighting how when things are no huddle and he operates quickly, that he actually has played some of his better ball there.
Yeah.
It just seems to be that this coaching staff just wants to pull in that rake, just wants to get that bubble wrap around him and not necessarily embarrass in the turnover department. That seems to be ingrained into this coaching staff's philosophy. Yeah. But that being said, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. I just even when we have been successful in turnovers, we've not won games, so it's almost a completely erroneous theory. But anyway, sorry, what are you saying?
But yeah, it would get more confidence in Brevin Jordan, who I think is a usable piece, not a game changer, but it can happen. It just at this point, there's nothing left to lose. We're in the top 5 pick, pretty much secured. You might as well evaluate what you have, what his weaknesses are. Personally, the one thing that I want to touch on for this game is I'm disappointed with how well the screen game worked, because I feel like it's positive reinforcement that they're going to keep on trying. The sheer amount of screens that they use, it is mind-numbing.
Well, yeah, I mean, the runs on second and medium or second and long.
Put it on Tim Kelly's tombstone.
And then a screen,
and long.
And a screen on third down. It's kind of become too predictable at times in some of the play. They've obviously narrowed the playbook again. I don't know why, but put as much as you can on his plate and see where he ends up. And at this stage, it's completely irrelevant. Because we've lost the last however many games now by over 20 points, not being competitive for long stretches, particularly the second half. So if you end up throwing 3 interceptions in the second half, so be it. At least he got to air it out and leave it all out there, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely. Just getting ready for the next one. Hopefully he can be able to till then. At least he's guaranteed on contract. At least he's for sure returning. Who knows what's going on in the building.
And there might not be too many of them. And I think just to wrap up on the coaching staff, again, we burned 2 timeouts this week before just to give some time to make decisions. And the general management of the game, I think, with Cully has not been there at a level that you could probably deem acceptable, I think, and consider what his role is. And you've seen a lot of guys like Ed Oregon in college, people are questioning, well, why are you paying a guy who effectively doesn't do much on either side of the ball? as a contributing and effectively, as a glorified cheerleader in some sense. So when he's not getting involved in schematics and game planning, and the only small parts he does have in terms of in-game decision making, he continues to make a mess of, and it'll go under the radar this week, but it still wasn't where it needs to be. Penalties on special teams that looked like they were a bit of run a fake, all this kind of stuff. Called a timeout, looked like they were going to go for a fourth, and then ended up kicking a field goal. So where do you stand on Cully, and do you see a team next year where he's still in charge?
I mean, I never thought I would ever say that I prefer Bill O'Brien's game management, but here we are. And
Oh yeah.
you thought you couldn't one up it, but Cully has just done a remarkable job. It almost seems like every week there's at least 2 calls where you just have to raise an eyebrow at. I mean, there's the clip of Kevin Stefanski just laughing on the sideline out of sheer shock for what he's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it just seems like he's getting paid a lot of money to take some flack at some press conferences, essentially.
Yeah.
I don't see him doing much on the sideline. I don't see him working with any position groups, and his coordinators pretty much do most there. So if he's not managing in-game sidelines or listening to whoever's in his ear, I mean, it really does seem like all he's doing is deflecting questions post-game.
Yeah, I think so. And what do you think of the defense in terms of give a lot of plays, big plays again, 50, 60-yard bombs that you're in cover one, you should probably get not necessarily kind of be in a position where Tyler Lockett will do it to a lot of teams, DK Metcalf will do it to a lot of teams. So you're going up against good competition, right? And obviously at the level of corners in which we have, particularly when you gave away Rasul Douglas to Green Bay and he's making plays every week. Again, we'll come back to that roster management piece. But I thought, for me, it was good to see Garrett Wallow getting out there, get some snaps. He got a TFL on the first drive, killed it, made him kick a field goal. Look, Lonnie Johnson's play and his mental aspect of his game is nowhere near it. I saw him re-share something about how he shut down DK Metcalf, which certainly wasn't the game I saw. But I thought it was good to see him at outside corner and just let him go and scrap it out, because that's what he is. He's a feisty corner. He'll give away penalties like he did on the goal line against Metcalf. People will try him, and look, I think Wilson saw him come on the field after Desmond King, I think, went out with a concussion. He came back in and they went after him repeatedly. Sometimes he held up just by his sheer mass and size, got in the way and forced some incompletions. Perhaps some of them should the receivers caught, but I thought it's good to see what he's got there, because if he just gets every snap, and I don't think he will, I think they'll bring back Desmond King, but reportedly he doesn't want to be here next year. So you think at least give Lonnie Johnson as many snaps as he can and see what he's got. And look, it won't be pretty, but you're building towards something that might reoccur in in a year's time.
Yeah, Lonnie's been, in all fairness to Lonnie, he's not gotten the best shake of things since he's been to Houston. Yeah. But I mean, the position he's in now is as good as any if you had picked one for me. The only thing that might be a little bit better is if he was in Pete Carroll's cover 3, where he could just jam people to line. But I mean, that's always when he's at his best. You look at the one successful game he had against the injured Chiefs a couple of years back when he was on Kelsey for the first time, and that's really where he started to show his mettle. He's all body. It just does not seem like he's caught up with the game at all. He was raw coming out, and he's still pretty rough around the edges. Maybe that's a discredit to the coaching staff, but that's a topic for earlier. But yeah, I was under the impression that being back in the safeties with Justin Reed, he would sort of fill in sort of like a brains and brawn situation, but that doesn't seem like he's taken anything away looking at his pursuit angles. Gave up a bunch of big plays. And to be fair, Russ will do that. DK and Tyler will do that, especially when the pass rush isn't necessarily hitting home all the time. But I think it's time to move on from Lonnie. It's another Bill O'Brien era malcontent that went from contending to rebuilding. And yeah, I mean, it's better than running out Terrence Mitchell, who has been roasted alive this season so far, and see if you potentially have a depth corner if he signs somewhere.
Yeah, but I think he's on a 2-year deal, Terrence. So there's a good chance they might bring him back just for depth, and he'll compete for a spot next year. But he's a guy that could be your 5th, 6th corner on your team, but you just don't want to start every down. Yeah, and you don't want Desmond King to be playing outside particularly either. So it would have been good to try out some other guys, but it looks like we're probably going to ride it out with them all. I thought the pass rush didn't really get home again this week, and again, that's partly just to do with the elusiveness of Russell Wilson and a bit of quality up front. Seeing Dwayne Brown back was all very kind of strange, but that kind of storyline kind of fed under the radar a bit, I think, because people probably played that one to death. But I thought, in terms of roster management, you're talking about Rasul Douglas making plays for Green Bay, 2 pick sixes in a row, and he I'm sure he caught in the end zone, did he not, to ice a game against Arizona as well. So he's made a number of plays for them. We've let them go. For a team that had 5 running backs on the roster at the start of the season, to be in this position where you only had a really slow-looking Royce Freeman, whose cuts actually weren't too bad, but he's been general zip in his legs and juice isn't there. But to go from having 5 running backs to cut 2, to trade 1, to then only have 1 healthy on an active roster with no other options, to me kind of goes back to the point that I've kind of held throughout this season, that actually Caserio's roster management has not been great. We talked about the dead money earlier. You're talking about cornerbacks we've let go that have actually made plays for other teams, good teams as well, that are in contention for Super Bowls. And now you look at that, the mess we're in up front in terms of the offensive line. If you look at and then you look at the running backs as well in terms of the offense. I think there's definitely, and he said it himself last week, like he didn't think he'd done a good enough job. But I think that's really starting to show up now as guys get banged up and the season kind of sets in a little.
Yeah, I think on the either the previous or 2 cap and trade episodes with Texans Cap, him, Landry Locker, and Mike Melter were talking about sort of Caserio's rough idea coming into the offseason. It seemed like the reason for the restructures and going veteran heavy was he was trying to rebuild sort of a more mature locker room. And based on all the discipline issues that we've had this year, the lackluster competitive product, it just seems like that plan just went and backfired on him. Just completely misused his waiver priorities when Texans were in a pretty prime spot, get some young talent. As you said, 5 running backs. And not only 5 running backs, but 5 decently paid running backs eating up a cap that you might not necessarily have to restructure a player for if they weren't on the roster. You look at, Deonta Foreman on the Titans, who was like a street pickup. You have D'Ernest Johnson, who was at one point undrafted free agent, performing well. Like, you can find these guys around the league, like they exist. Some fresh legs.
It's the easiest position on your roster.
It just seems like an old school kind of mindset in terms of team building. And they were saying that hopefully this year you'll see him get back to use as he sort of clears away the sheet. It's just the main gripe that I have with it is all of this could have happened this year. We could have just taken our lumps this year and then started fresh on the next league year.
Yeah. And just like our second halves, and just like the week prior, it was literally numerically pointless. And I think that's where I struggle really, because you kind of felt like with the signings they were making, they were just treading more. They were effectively punting on this season. And actually, I remember this, and I actually think I can't remember who tweeted this out last week, and I saw it, and I remember to mention it. Was, if you remember at the end of last season, they talked about having Romeo Cornell potentially coming back as an interim guy for a year, and that was before Caserio was in the building. That was before. We cleaned out, some of the guys here, but, not a lot's changed. I think you've got to remember that, there's not a huge amount of people in the front office, and some of the coaching staff are holdovers, apart from Nick Caserio. He's the only one that's potentially going to make a marked difference over time. But that was an idea floated at the time. And I remember being absolutely livid about the prospect of that, because I think you're basically punting on a season. And ironically, in a game where the best 2 players probably on the field were the 2 Australian punters for either team might make the Pro Bowl for either side. And okay, that's one good signing. Cameron Johnson, great. He has been. But, we need probably another 15, 20 acceptable pro-level football players on this squad. We didn't go down any route to find them this season. And again, I think when you have another loss like that, okay, there was some positives. Davis Mills getting development, but beyond that, beyond the Davis Mills, Brevin Jordan, Nico Collins, okay, Grugier Hill possibly, and I think people quick to praise him, but he's as I said, he's a Dylan Cole back up to your your linebackers. He's a guy that comes in release spot. He's not an every down player for you. And you've got, apart from that, there's not many that you want to take on and take to new, and Trayvon Smith gets an extension. You're like, well, great, okay, he's another depth piece. Derek Rivers getting an extension, which I just was really strange because he's not played. And again, that just probably goes back to who's influencing that decision. So kind of makes you feel a bit uneasy at the time, just as it made me feel uneasy when Grugy Hill was going off the field and old Easterby was over, arms draped around him, giving him well wishes, and apparently he's not as injured as he may have thought. But yeah, it's just that feeling of similarity from last year to this year, and it kind of like you don't talk about the game, you don't talk about what you're looking forward to. It's just kind of what might happen in the future, and I constantly doubt logic to prevail.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the roster, more than likely, we're going to have to do a very similar thing to what we did this offseason in terms of just a wave of whatever veterans are looking to get paid, essentially to fill out our holes.
Yeah.
Well, one of the few optimistic signs I can have is just whoever we take in the draft early, how are they performing? And then everyone talks about switching out the coaching staff. I just don't even understand who's taking a job here, who's trying to improve their resume in order to do this. The only other person on the team who can even bother taking over duties would be possibly Pep Hamilton, but he hasn't even called plays in the league, to my knowledge. I know he was in the running for the Miami OC gig. For whatever reason, that didn't work out. And so you have to question if brighter days are even immediately on the horizon.
Well, that's it. And I think you've got to find coping mechanisms to watch this team on a Sunday, because I think you'll need them if you're going to continue to associate yourself next year. Because as you said, there's not a huge amount of reasons why you think things would change. And okay, they might get say the hopeful trade of Watson happens, and you can bring in a couple extra sort of program guys are on the season ticket, guys you can print on the front of the program, because we don't have them right now. But even then, they're going to be year one young players, so you can't expect too much really in terms of the competitiveness, in terms of that. And if you do get some decent veterans around, you might be scrappy and you might be 4 or 5 wins. But you're probably still looking at a top 10 pick at best, I would think. Without the absence of lightning striking, which I think seems quite impossible. But you've got this kind of the feeling of this lull that we're kind of in, and we've got Jacksonville obviously this week. It's probably a game you could lose, and it might help you. Where do you stand on that? Because the mess they're in, I think it makes you feel a little bit lucky. But certainly we've found this season how the other half live. But it's a game you could probably do with losing, really.
That is probably the highlight of my year. Is just all of these Urban Meyer stories that just keep coming out of the woodwork from the start of the season to the end.
Yeah,
it makes me feel better that potentially we don't have the worst coaching staff in the AFC South. I do think that this is probably going to be a revenge game. They do have one key difference on the roster being Trevor Lawrence, who's doing, by all accounts, his best to try to carry that franchise on his back. You just see countless small mistakes. Their O-line, despite all these additions to it, is still looking terrible. But that being said, I do think that they're more than likely going to take this one, which would be good for us in the draft, sure, as we're right next to them in the pecking order. It's 2 and 3 respectively. But I just don't see the key issue is I don't see how this offense can put points on the board consistently, and that hasn't really been answered in the past 5 or 6 weeks or so, like you said, after the bye.
Yeah, and I think when you go back to week 1 as well, I think people, the turnovers have kind of clouded what this defense is ultimately, and that no more so obviously than the 2 divisional games that we've won, and they were both hit I think 3 turnovers in week 1, 5 in Tennessee, and we didn't, albeit it was a great result, and Tyrod Taylor played at a level that we've not seen, and he's probably never going to get back to in the rest of his career. But when you go to Jacksonville, it's probably as you said, it's probably a chance to win a game of our final win of the season, because when you look, you've got the Chargers coming to town when you travel out west to go to San Francisco, and then you got the visit of Tennessee, who may or may not need that in the playoff. And regardless, I think they've probably got a chance to beat you, as long as they don't turn the ball over 5 times, because even when they did, it was still close. So yeah, it's probably very Texans to win and then maybe relegate themselves to 3rd or 4th in the draft. But I think sometimes that doesn't necessarily always mean a bad thing, because how often is 1 or 2 necessarily the best player. But I think we're in a position where if you think in terms of just genuine talent, we're behind Jacksonville, we're behind Detroit, we're behind probably the whole league in terms of just accumulating talent. So if it is 3rd or 4th, I kind of find myself not getting too worked up about it, because ultimately we just need as many good players that can actually perform at an adequate level in the pros, and we just simply don't have that right now. So I'm kind of not too fussed.
Yeah. One of my few silver linings is that it's a little bit easier to trade that pick away for somebody looking for a quarterback to trade up.
Yeah.
It's a little bit lower on the pecking board. Price will come down a little bit. And also in the draft where everyone is still kind of scattered on finding these blue chip prospects, getting something in the middle is pretty good, decent value compared to getting like a number one pick and having it flop in your face, so to speak.
Well, that's it, and I think that's a really good point, Matt, because you've got that dynamic in the background where obviously we've still got this hopeful trade of what Deshaun, if the legal timeline aligns, whether that will or not, I don't, who knows. But yeah, any other move he makes, he can't be seen to be taking subpar value, because ultimately then that the Jackals will be at the door a little bit in terms of their stance and negotiating whether. But if you are in third or fourth, you've actually got a better chance to get a solid return. Whereas if you're trading the number one and number two, then you've got to have this sort of gross premium that's a blockbuster trade to make it worthwhile to justify it to your owner. Not our owner, because he doesn't really give a shit. But justify it to the fan base or what have you. In functional organizations, of course. So I think it's a good point, that. And just before we talk about college prospects, I think that is the silver lining looking ahead. Is there any? I just had this thought, and just now is it talking about potential who would take it, and you've got to probably, if you were going to change coaching staff and get a new head coach, you've probably got to get lucky. You've probably got to buy a little low and hope for a big return. But is there any guys in college that you think might not necessarily be at a big Power 5 school, these jobs that people don't want to walk away from, but have done a good job, kind of similar to Bill O'Brien did a good job at Penn State, and kind of earned his right to be a pro coach, and kind of got their name up in lights a little. Is there any names you've got at the tip of your tongue in the college game you think could be a potential fit to keep an eye out for?
It's a good question. One of the best ones, I guess he's sort of getting his big shot right now, but I'm really keeping my eye on Marcus Freeman from Notre Dame. I've been watching guys for a while in the draft, and the defense that he put in Cincinnati is very much pro-adaptable. As much as people talk about Brett Venables as being like one of the main defenders in college, I think Marcus Freeman is right there with him. Really enjoy what he does. Aside from that, Lane Kiffin, I think, if he can expand a little bit, there's definitely a chance there. I'm not so much on the Lincoln Riley hype train as everyone else did. I think he could easily get a job in the NFL. I just don't see his offense necessarily translating that well over there. But if I had to choose like the next young defensive mind that makes a shot, it would be Marcus Freeman.
Yeah, he's going to take over right from Kelly, isn't he?
As Notre Dame, as the D coordinator to get promoted.
Yeah, so he's going to take the head coach role. So I suppose he's probably not going to walk away from that for a time. But I suppose the guys like Matt Campbell, the guy is it Franklin at Penn State. These are all the kind of names that are kind of pushed out there, and it's all kind of agent narrative, right? The stuff we see. So who knows if they will make a change. But I thought it was interesting last week when Caserio didn't commit to David Culley next year. He said, I'm not going to be drawn on comments about next season. So I don't know if he feels like he has to make a change. He's probably given David Culley a shorthand. He'll probably, he'll walk away with a nice retirement check. But I think if you're going to get away from a situation like you had on Sunday, and like you've had a number of games where there's been empty seats, and then the travelling support then come and show up in a decent side, particularly Seahawks, one of those kind of franchises that have had success, so they've got a truly national fan base. You end up having bigger cheers for them making plays, and you do your own. And look, I don't think I've talked about this in depth last week, right? But I don't think the organisation necessarily, apart from Nick Caserio, knows and or cares about that. But I think he's probably the only guy to actually take a logical inference from a situation like that and see change may well be required. I've got a horrible feeling nothing will roll out a similar iteration like how we evolved from 20 to 2021. I think we may do something similar, not go too crazy, and then look to make a change later on. But I feel like a change you just need to spark something. I just don't think they've sparked anything this year.
I hear you. And maybe from like a morale standpoint, that absolutely is needed. Because, I mean, no players enjoy going through this type of year. Nobody enjoys getting beat down like that, having your morale or your will to fight just taken away from you. Reminds me a lot of the 49ers Jim Tunsil era. where it was just needed to buy time. But then they just did another one and done with Chip Kelly. And that's the only question I have that I have with David Culley is if you were to ask him, how much brighter would the grass be on the other side, so to speak? And who would you even like? Would it be a Lovie Smith situation where he sort of takes over for a year as like a bridge? I mean, if you can tell me from like a player morale standpoint that it's a good, I can get on board with him. I'm as sick of him as anybody else is. Although his press conferences are golden when he just denies reality. It's pretty special to hear. I just don't see another coach making much more of an impact that he does, aside from maybe a few less atrocious game management decisions.
Well, yeah, that's it. And I mean, there's a limit to how much you can change his roster on the off season. But I think when you see the complete apathy, like when I was at the tailgate a couple of weeks ago against the Jets, it was distressing to see. It looked like the same again this week. The seats are empty. That's only going to get worse, if next season is what we all expect it to be like, without some sort of big catalyst for change and some kind of something to stimulate interest and just genuine reasons to go and watch this team. And in its current structure, where the off season will ever change, or the off field, part of it, with the man who will not be mentioned, if that'll ever change in any time soon, then which from all sounds it doesn't seem like it will be. And we're just going to, and they just think this is part and parcel of a rebuild, but it's more than that, and so it's a bit depressed. But let's not try and lower the tone too much. Let's talk some college prospects, because that's the kind of stuff that keeps you going, I think, really. If you had your choice of anyone, assuming you're sitting third, who would you say the first two guys off the board are, and then who would be your choice at that point if we're sitting third?
I don't think a quarterback is going necessarily within the first couple slots. It would make sense if it happens in the middle of the top 10 to me. If somebody is going to force it, that they would trade with one of those teams who has a couple of picks to spare, so that way they're still getting some front-end talent. More than likely, that's going to be one of the two edge rushers, if not both, coming off the board early.
Yep.
That being Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson.
Yep.
I've seen all the hype for Hutchinson getting first overall, and I can understand it. It just seems kind of like recency bias to me with like the playoff game, him getting ready to go off to help this championship run, the Wisconsin game or the Ohio State game. There we go, where he just completely blew people over. I do like Hutchinson. Don't get me wrong. I just think people are getting things a little out of sight in terms of what he's done recently. You look at Thibodeau, and it just his burst, his first step quickness, it looks like he shot out of a cannon. I just love the way that he moves. He's got like a pro-ready body. I really enjoy what Thibodeau brings to the table. So if those two guys are off the board, in my heart of hearts, I would love if Kyle Hamilton was the pick.
Yes, that's my one. Yeah, that's my guy.
Everyone will bring up safety, positional value, and things of that jazz, but
I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. He's that good.
That good. I agree entirely. Yeah. He's my number one player in the entire class. He's a unicorn. For every, it's the law of equivalent exchange. For every Kyle Pitts freak of nature, there has to be a Kyle Hamilton that exists on the defensive side. It feels like. It's just insane the way he moves, the size that he is, how disciplined he is in terms of his eyes. I just can't see anybody else making as much of an impact. I mean, Minka, Derwin, guys of that nature, he's on that tier. And I hope the league learns their lessons where those guys were bottom of the top 10. I think he should, if Jamal Adams is worth a top 5 pick, then Kyle Hamilton should be in the top 3.
So a couple of questions for you, right? Number one, is Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, would you say they're a tier above the guys that are Hutchinson and Thibodeau? Are they in the same realm as that?
Yeah, I absolutely think they're on a higher tier. Myles Garrett in particular is on the highest tier. He was built in a lab. You can't convince me otherwise. In terms of where these guys are, I think they're somewhere in between like the Chase Young and defensive Josh Allen range. I think there's a lot of merit to them. I think they're both kind of raw. I think Hutchinson has probably the highest floor, and that's why he's talking about going as early as he is. But in terms of Thibodeau, I think he's still got a few things to learn before he can really get to that next edge.
Do you know what I think? Do you know who Thibodeau reminds me of a bit of D Ford coming out of Auburn? I think he's speed and he's got power, and he's got a nice blend of the two. I'm maybe doing him a little disservice there, right? But he kind of reminds me of him a little bit. And obviously he's not had a great career since he got to Kansas, when he left Kansas City and what have you. His injuries have kind of curtailed him, and he was at 49, traded 49ers or what have you. But then I think with Hutchinson as well, I think I kind of get Taven Bryant vibes at times. I know he's not a defensive tackle, he plays, but a bit more on the edge. But there's just something about him how he looks a lot younger when he takes his helmet off, right? So therefore, I don't think he's matured physically. Therefore, that may suggest that he's got a higher upside. I'm perhaps overthinking it a little bit, but when I see him not be able to bend the edge in the way that you expect the guys to take them that high, I'm almost kind of, the more I think about it, the more I've watched them this year, I kind of feel like, well, actually, I don't mind if we just drop down, because if you're saying that they're not in that top tier, then the value is the value of that pick, regardless of the draft class. You don't control that, so therefore you want to trade out. But as you said, a guy like Kyle Hamilton, or even perhaps Evan Neal, are they the best position or best player at that position? It might not be rated as highly, but if you can impact the play on more downs than you can an edge rusher, with a win rate of 20% makes you an all-pro, then I'm kind of okay with maybe dropping down to one of those two guys.
Yeah. I don't think you should overpay for something that's not going to end up working out in the long haul. Yeah. This draft is loaded in edges. You can probably find one near the top of the second that you like that probably should have gotten in the first. Honestly, let's say it's some medicals drop him or for whatever reason. I think what ultimately they need to do is they just need to find starters. They need to find starters that can overcome bad coaching and just fill in as many gaps as possible. On the bright side, it all helps. Any position at this point, honestly, is going to be helpful to the team. Even if it is a tackle, just to bump out Charlie Hagg. I think anybody can be useful right now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think if you do take a tackle, then I suppose Tunsil's days are over, and you might not get a great return for that. But I think in terms of the contract value, in terms of you're going to have, you will have to either the team that trades for him are going to have to renegotiate, or Texans are going to have to do that at least at the end of next year at the latest. When you see that startling value, and you think, well, what's the point of huffing a Ferrari in a house where where an apartment you don't have a garage or something like that, and I think it's just like, doesn't really make too much sense right now. So I think there's a lot to be had in terms of those sort of top four guys that we've talked about. Is there any guys that you think might sneak in there and teams might want to trade up for and we can get out of there, or is there any guys that you've got a good feeling about?
I think due to the nature of the offensive tackle class, you might see some guys trade up in order to snag like a secure thing, like the Carolina Panthers. I think are near the bottom of the 10. Top 10, they might want to sneak up and make sure that they can grab one of the three like big names. You have Evan Neal, Akem Ekwonu, and then Charles Cross is building up a lot of steam. They can really use him. Pure pass protector. Reminds me of kind of like a higher profile Andre Dillard coming out of Washington State, with also Mike Leach. If there's one thing he knows, it's pass protecting left tackles.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you watch his tape against Alabama, it's there to see that he's a first round pick. It just depends how high people want to take him and how the positional needs. And it's a tough one, right? Because we could go any position and you could be happy with it. And I think that's why that kind of demotes that kind of safety question. But I think as you said, when there's a rarity like that, Kyle Hamilton, I just can't see past him. One question I did have actually, Kyle Hamilton, before we go back to the rest of the prospect. One question I've got is, people don't throw at him a lot, and and if a team was just to go, right, let's see what this Rook's got and target him 5-6 times in the first quarter, do you think he's got enough to overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get beat. Every rookie is going to get beat as they're adjusting, But you can't teach his speed. His recovery speed is insane. There's the one play where I believe it was week 2 or 3 where he has enough time to wait for the ball as he's coming across the hash. And that's just stupid. Like you don't see that. Even with like the speedy safeties, that's like Jesse Bates, Justin Simmons type of stuff. And yet he has the same body as like a Jeremy Chin. Like I think there's a lot of ways you can get him involved early, even if you're just like limiting his plate and then slowly expanding it as the season goes along.
Yeah. And beyond the offensive tackle guys, is there any other spots that the guy that I like, we talked about with Texans thoughts, was George Karlaftis. I think probably a bit early to take him in the top 5 maybe, but he's got a guy. He's probably a guy that's got potentially the highest ceiling in the draft, and he's good tape's good. He's bad tape, particularly Michigan State, was he kind of got taken out of the game. But there's games against Wisconsin, there's games against Iowa where he just wrecks the shop. So what's where are you on George Karlaftis, and have you got any other names before we?
Oh man,
start wrapping
you are
up?
talking my language. George Karlaftis is like my crush for this draft. I love him. For everyone who made a weird Watt brothers comparison for Aiden Hutchinson, I think George Karlaftis is more built for that, honestly.
Yeah, he's closer to that.
It's insane. He's like 270, and yet he moves like he's an outside linebacker. It's ridiculous. When it's all right, it's amazing. And when it's wrong, you can tell that he needs a lot of work. But if you can put it all together, if you can get him the right coaching, if he improves his hands, he moves in a rare way, and he's also inhumanly strong. It's just, there's a lot to like. I think he is a fringe top 10 player. If Kayvon Thibodeau wasn't in this class, he would be getting a lot more steam towards the first pick, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. And is there any other guys that before we head out here you wanna touch upon that you've got a beat on?
In terms of the offensive line, I really like Zion Johnson from Boston College. In terms of they still want to keep doing this outside zone type of nonsense. He's one of the few guards who I think can hold his own in the interior while also being able to move to be able to get these blocks that they want to execute. He's got another teammate from Boston College, and Alec Lindstrom, who's going to the Shrine Bowl, I believe. He's probably going to be like a late day 2, early day 3. If you can get both of those together.
He's the brother of the guy from Atlanta, right?
Yeah, from Chris Lindstrom. Yeah. And all their family goes to Boston College. It's insane. He's not a physical marvel, but he's pretty technically sound. And in terms of like a cheap center that you could get to build out the interior, I think they have great chemistry. I think they would be a nice complement in terms of fixing our problems.
And in terms of the cornerbacks, because it's one thing we've probably never had as a start is probably your top 3 player at cornerback. I know Stingley's been injured. You've got it's probably then pick your poison after that. But there's questions about his health, which there's the adage hurt guys stay hurt. Would you take Stingley with the 3rd if he was there, or where'd you sit on that one?
It's really tough. You really have to trust your medical evaluations in order to put that kind of investment in a guy. We were just talking about Kevin Johnson and how his body just did not seem like it was built for the big leagues for the amount of punishment that he was taking. Yeah. So he can have all the talent in the world. And we were even talking on the last time I was here about how much we wanted him. And I do to a certain degree. I just worry if that's maybe a high investment for him as opposed to maybe a guy like Andrew Booth, who will be later in the top 10 to top 15 range, who has a lot of physical gifts that rival Stingley's, in my opinion.
And in terms of the quarterbacks, just to round this one off, Matt, is you Corral or Pickett? Who would you say is the first guy off the board? It seems to be Corral, but I'll tell you, when I watched him against Auburn, it was, and I've watched a couple other games, and I've seen some breakdowns of him as well. I think it's all he's very good at slants, quick crossers, digs, quick outs. Well, maybe lost less of the quick outs, but thrown to the boundary, I think, is the issue. And if you think of the big criticism between all the guys who've come into the league, and that is the issue they struggle with, is thrown to the boundary outside the numbers, because it's a different game in college just by the position of the hashes as well. So for me, I think he's just really limited, and I wouldn't want the Texans to take him this year unless we had multiple picks and then you get him later. I think Kenny Pickett's a kind of guy that interests me. I think he's one of these guys. He's a high floor. That fake slide that he did in the bowl weekend there was pretty good. So you can tell he's a guy that works his game, and he's a guy just like Corral. They're both competitors. They're maybe sort of backups, but how would you sort of compare them to Davis Mills coming out as the kind of sort of universal top 2 guys?
When you look at the quarterbacks this year, it's pretty understandable about why people thought that Davis Mills would be in a relatively early discussion this year. A lot of what he's shown is pretty similar. Everybody has good moments, and they all have their flaws that they can learn from. I personally, Corral scares me. He seems kind of like, for lack of a better term, the Jimmy Garoppolo of this class. When Lane is taking care of him, when Lane tells him what his offense is, what his reads are, he does really good. He was able to cut down the turnovers this year. But it seems kind of like almost like a Mitchell Trubisky-esque one-year wonder type of performance that we're seeing. And I just don't know if he can make plays out of structure on his own.
Yeah.
For Kenny Pickett, I love his moxie. I love the way he moves around. I just see overall limits in his body in terms of how he's going to adjust to the pros.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think some of the kind of processing and some of the kind of stuff that he does at the line of scrimmage in that Pittsburgh offense, albeit it's more pro ready than your sort of classic spread, right? But it's not necessarily set him up for whole success. But in terms of what you want to see this off season, obviously we kind of dig up some draft prospects there and the boards and the information that's out there in the public sphere is always very different to the private one, and the terms of the guys that are actually getting paid to make these evaluations, and often they aren't always necessarily more accurate than others. But it's one. I always think they're two parallel worlds, and there'll be some shocks I think once you get out of the first round. But in terms of what you want to see this team kind of put together and make strides forward, I mean, it might be just baby steps, but what do you want to see this team kind of do the off season after we get through this slog of last 4 games, including Jacksonville this Sunday?
Personally, I don't want us to force a quarterback pick this year. If you take him in the first round, I think it should be. If that's a decision, I don't want them to toil around in the middle, the third, the fourth, or whatever. What is it? Kentley Platt of Math Bomb for the RIS scores. He wrote a article for the Detroit Lions blog, so to speak, about the hit rate in terms of quarterbacks starting X amount of games, putting this many yards, and what round they were taken. And the further you go down, the smaller that list just shrinks to where if you like him, you might as well just rush him to the first. Either he's the guy or he's not. I hope they take advantage of the undrafted free agent market this year. Big storyline that I was following last offseason was just with the COVID super senior rule, where we saw a very limited draft class last year, which is probably why Nick Caserio sort of bundled up his picks, sort of tried to look for guys that he had hard information on, that he had good sources on, and not necessarily drafting a bunch of unknown commodities in bulk. I imagine this year is when the pendulum starts to swing the other way, and I think he's going to be kind of aggressive with, it's almost double the size in terms of the priority free agent list that's going to be available this year, and hopefully some gems can be found.
Yeah, I think so, because you're right. It's funny because it's when you've been in Houston the last couple of weeks ago, it's COVID was a thing of the past. Kind of right now, it's kind of changing a bit here across Europe and whatnot. So it's kind of strange. But yeah, the college scene has a bit of normality in terms of just the structures they put around it. So it's a bit more of a level playing field, I think, this year in the draft. And yeah, hopefully that opens up a youth movement. It's badly needed. And no more so that running back, and I would draft 3 running backs this year if you've got enough picks, just to get some young guys on this roster. And hopefully we see Scotty Phillips in the last couple of weeks. He's apparently not going to play this week, but he might get 3 games before the end of the season just to see what he's got, if he's worth keeping around next year, rather than this sort of aging group of players that has put a bit of a sorry season. But you got any coping mechanisms for a Sunday? Have you moved off beer to liquor, or how do you manage it this Sunday? Or how are you going to manage the last 4 games before it kind of feels like you get a bit of respite?
No, I just enjoying the trench play. That's one of the few things I have to look forward to. Howard settling in. This is sort of his very important evaluation period for picking up the 5th-year option. So that's something to look out for. And also, Jonathan Grenard has been my saving grace for this defense this year. That almost interception that he had it was ridiculous.
He wasn't too
Charlie Heck holding his own.
Yeah, Grenard was not too happy with me last week after I sent out a clip. I got some messages from him, so he's we're still trying to make peace there with him. But we'll see if we can maybe get him on the off season or something like that to talk through it. But yeah, he didn't like the fact I'd put a clip out and said that he'd over pursued and left the running lane. But there you go. So, but yeah, these guys, the young guys, this young generation of guys are searching their name on social media to see what's out there. So yeah, if you're going to do it, got to take it. So we'll see. But yeah, no, I think those guys are definitely ones to watch, I think. But as you said, there's not many. You just want to see Nico get a couple of scores for the end of the year. You don't want him to go into year 2 without it. You want Brevin Jordan to just see if he can do a bit more in the trenches and block. I think that's one thing you really want to see, because you want to understand and it doesn't seem like he needs to be a 3 down type tight end, but that's his aspiration. And I think, you know, there's potential there, and he's still a young guy. You know, I think a lot of people said that in the offseason when you interviewed him. He just came across as a really young guy. So, you know, he's probably got a bit of physical maturation to do as well to try and bulk out that frame and see if he can kind of hold in. But yeah, I think there's some good storylines to watch. You never know. Trevor Lawrence might just kick into gear this weekend and maybe into second spot. But yeah, I think third or fourth might be a sweet spot. Often is in the draft. So at least we've got that to look forward to, because that's been robbed of us the last few years. Yeah,
it's so awesome to have our own first round pick again this year. It's kind of like our little Christmas present to ourselves. Very nice to enjoy.
Well, that's it. I mean, April comes around pretty quickly, and you've obviously got free agency as well, which will be a tough period for this team unless they make changes in the front office and the coaching staff if players want to come here. So the draft may be the next, you know, logical kind of or feasible avenue that we start to bring in some talent that's going to make this team a little bit easier to watch next year. But Matt, thank you very much for your time, mate, trying to make some sense of it all. For the good people listening, if you're watching on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe, leave a comment, give us some feedback. If there's anything you wanted to hear us talk about, it's hard to put this agenda together every week, but and the way this team is. But if there's anything you'd like to hear about, reach out. I've had a good couple of suggestions the last couple of weeks. Not been many articles at podcasttexans.com in my malaise for this team, but we'll probably try and, if you've not checked out, there's some permanent pieces there that continue to be unchanged as this team is unchanged until we get to this offseason. But thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you again after the Jags next week.